Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Vikings postgame show here on Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Dane Mizutani of the Pioneer Press, inside whatever they call Mile High Stadium now, after the Vikings fall 21-20 here in a game in which they kept giving it away, Dane. And that is the story of the game. And I got to tell you, it's a little bit difficult for me when the main story just is, look, they turned the ball over. Because a lot of times on the post-game show after a loss, what we like to try to do is look for things that are actionable, things that they could change, things that caused this, whether it was decisions leading up to the roster or, the game plan or the play calling. And there is certainly stuff that we will discuss for sure, including the first drive and the decision to run some sort of trickery with Josh Dobbs, which has never seemingly played out in Kevin O'Connell's favor. But still, when it comes down to how both teams played for the vast majority of this game, the Vikings moved the ball. The Vikings stopped the first 4 attempts of the Broncos in the red zone. It seemed like the defense was on point, bailing them out pretty consistently. The Broncos didn't run the ball well. Russell Wilson had some moments early on, but did not look great through most of this game. And yet they're on the doorstep of getting they didn't even need a first down. Just don't give the ball away, kick another field goal, and you probably walk out of here with a win. And Alexander Mattison fumbles the game away. I guess I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this other than to say that over the last 5 weeks, they have dominated the turnover differential, and what goes up must come down. We don't have to be rocket scientists in order to know that. And that's what happened tonight, that they got on the bad side of some of that turnover luck, and they end up losing this game. Now, that is not a free pass to the things that we will talk about, including O'Connell's decision there and a couple other ones that people have maybe called too conservative and so forth. But I always have trouble when the answer and the explanation is right there in front of you. And in this game, it was right there in front of you. It was the turnovers.
Absolutely. And we're going to dissect this, over the next hour. And it's just going to probably feel a little bit like we're going in circles because we're just going to end up talking about the turnovers in the end. And everything kind of leads back to the 3-0 turnover differential. It's something Kevin O'Connell preached all week. I think heading into this game, the Denver Broncos had won 3 straight, and they had forced 10 turnovers in that stretch. So they were showing that they can force the hand of the other offense. And if the offense on the other side does not take care of the ball, they can, take over a game on defense. The Broncos can. And I think that was a big coaching point all week for the Vikings, for Kevin O'Connell. So to see it then play out in the exact way that you were hoping it wouldn't play out, it has to be frustrating. And walking around that locker room, you could tell there was frustration listening to Coach Kevin O'Connell talk and watching him kind of walk off that podium tonight. You could tell there was frustration because I think it really does come down to what you just said is you can dissect this game any way you want. You can criticize certain play calls, certain decisions in certain moments, certain players not making plays when they were there to be made. But at the end of the day, if they just hold on to the football, none of that matters. It's all moot. They win the game if they just do not cough the ball up. Now, we're going to talk about the first drive of the game. One of the turnovers could be chalked up directly to a probably too cute, questionable play call from Kevin O'Connell. We'll dive into that, I'm sure. It's just a weird game to talk about because we're sitting there after the game in the locker room talking to safety Cam Bynum, talking to safety Josh Metellus, basically saying, like, what happened on that last drive, even though they were spectacular pretty much all night long on the defensive side of the ball. Cam Bynum said we weren't at our best when we needed to be. That's true. They did kind of just let them dink and duck the ball all the way downfield. Then Courtland Sutton made a big play in the end zone. But again, it goes back to the turnovers. If they hold on to the ball, that last drive doesn't matter at all. The Vikings should have won this game by a couple of scores. Instead, they lose by 1 point because of the turnovers.
So I want to talk about the criticism of O'Connell and the approach in some situations where they could have gone for it, could have tried to score a touchdown. There was I think it was a 4th and 1 that they decided not to go for and punted away. I'm going to lean toward defending that more than criticizing that, which I know sounds strange for me because I have go for it tattooed across my chest. But the way that Josh Dobbs was playing tonight looked much more like somebody who was a little less comfortable, much more like a journeyman quarterback, much more like a new offense. It wasn't as smooth as it was against the New Orleans Saints, where it just looked like drop back, deliver to open wide receivers. And there was some of that, but there were a lot more scrambles where it wasn't as pretty. And there were two great scrambles that resulted in touchdowns, one where he threw it and another one where he ran in. But on a play-to-play basis, they were having much more success running the football than they were dropping back, delivering pass after pass after pass, and just moving the sticks.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to be a couple of big throws. There was one to Josh Oliver right before they fumbled that looked like it was going to be the dagger. There was another one along the sideline where Addison ran a really tremendous route, got open, threw it in time, but the timing was just a little bit off, which I think can be attributed to a lot of really good players on the Denver Broncos, especially on their secondary, but their coverages were good. They've clearly fixed so many things on the defensive side. So I understood why, if Kevin O'Connell was watching Dobbs play and feeling like, there seems to be a turnover in the air, there seems to be a little more of those scrambles aren't coming out perfectly and so forth, that he decided that he was going to play it a little more safe. And this is where it comes down to, when you lose a game, and we've been through this multiple times this year, when you lose a game, the first inclination is to say, well, they did everything wrong. And that's fair in some instances. In some losses, they do everything wrong, and there's nothing to really talk about. But in this case, I thought that it was handled just fine, and they were about to run away with the game, put it in a dagger, and call it a night. And then they just swung the door wide open because of Alexander Mattison. And that's the other discussion that needs to be had. This was Madison's best game, I think, by far. He played well against the Chargers earlier this year. This defense for the Broncos cannot stop the running game really at all. And Mattison is plowing forward, run after run, having a pretty good night, and then fumbles away the best game of his season. And I think, there are people who want Mattison benched. I don't know how you do that. You're already down Cam Akers. Ty Chandler had an excellent game, save for the pass block he was supposed to make that the guy hits Josh Dobbs' arm and turns into an interception, which these things have to be factored in, how well somebody can handle the offense. So I also want to see Ty Chandler in there all the time. He had a phenomenal game overall, but I can see why there might be a trust factor. And you also just can't have one running back. So Madison has to be a part of this. He was always going to have to be a part of this. And this was, in my mind, until he fumbles that ball, this was like the ideal Madison role where, okay, he's in like half the time, but not all the time. And then you have this thunder and lightning type of situation. And instead he ends up fumbling it away. And this is, again, where we kind of just go, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Right. I don't know what to say about this. Like, the loss happens there. And then the defensive side of it, let's discuss at some point, but the loss happens there after a game where he's the best that he's been all year long. And that's kind of like what this felt like. This felt like you are a team that had a 5-game winning streak that was bound to kind of have something go wrong at some point. Yeah. And it did.
For sure. And it's totally fair to say, like, I know people have latched on to that decision to not go for it, to punt in the first half. And I think it was 4th and short from pretty close to midfield. I'm pretty sure the 4th down bot said go for it. Analytics said go for it. But it was like a 2% difference between go and punt. And to your point, the offense just looked kind of clunky early on. Josh Dobbs fumbled the ball. Well, obviously fumbled the ball because of the pitch play that went awry, but also just couldn't get the exchange down with Garrett Bradbury twice. So I don't blame Kevin O'Connell for punting the ball there. And all of that kind of added up to, you got the ball back after halftime because your defense stepped up. You marched right down the field and took a 17-9 lead. And then you're there with a chance to kind of go ahead. And this is where we talk about Alexander Mattison. If he doesn't fumble that ball, the Vikings win this game running away, I think. Even if you kick a field goal there, I think the game's pretty much out of hand, because it just never really looked like Denver was going to threaten to kind of make this a game unless you kept it close. And that was proven. 5 field goals up until the touchdown on the final drive. So if Alexander Mattison doesn't fumble the ball there, I think the Vikings just run away with it. So all of the well, was Kevin O'Connell conservative early on? None of that really matters to me because he got the look he was hoping for. They went out and they proved they were better early in the second half, and they were moving the ball on the drive that Alexander Madison fumbled 1st and 10 from the plus 34. And, they're just a touchdown felt inevitable there. I think we even looked at each other and said this game could get out of hand because it really felt like it was about to. Then the ball hits the ground, and then you're kind of fighting it and up against it the rest of the way. But that's the turning point in the game. And I understand why people watch Ty Chandler and want him to get more touches. I believe he should get more touches. I frankly wouldn't care if you just inverted the touches and made Ty Chandler your, lead back per se, and kind of shifted Alexander Madison into a role that he had with Dalvin Cook. But you're not taking Alexander Madison off the field completely, which I think is what people are going to overreact and kind of say, well, Madison should never play again. Well, he's going to have to play because they just don't have depth in the backfield. But with the way Ty Chandler ran the ball today, with the way Alexander Madison really turned the game on its head with that costly fumble, I think it's totally fair and on the table to say maybe there should be a new lead back here in Minnesota. It seems almost oversimplified. Like every time Ty Chandler touches the ball, something good happens. And Madison, it kind of feels like a crapshoot. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe it'll be bad. Sometimes it'll be a fumble. Sometimes it'll be a run right into someone else's butt. But you never really know. Whereas with Ty Chandler, it feels like, okay, something good could happen almost every time. So I got to imagine the fumble plays a role into these reps moving forward. Kevin O'Connell was pretty strong about, taking care of the football in the early stages when they started 0-3, 1-4. At one point said, if people can't take care of the ball, I will find someone who can. Well, they have Ty Chandler now, and I think that's where we're headed. But you're not just going to take Madison out of the game plan completely. You just can't afford to do that with the depth you don't have.
Yeah, it's true. But I do feel like it needs to be, like you said, Ty Chandler the rest of the way as the lead back, and you're just going to have to manage some of the other stuff. If there is a pass block that gets missed, then you're going to have Josh Dobbs escape it and sense it and not have his arm hit. That was another thing where it was, and this is one of those classic like game of inches types of games, because it's a few inches away from the ball being knocked down away from Courtland Sutton. It's a few inches away from a Josh Metellus interception that, people have pointed out, which I thought Jerry Jeudy played amazing cornerback on that play, at least the way it looked to me from up here. And then, Josh Dobbs getting his arm hit, a fumble at the end of the game by the Broncos rolls out of bounds. And like that, it was just that type of game. So I think that there's two different types of losses. There's a loss where you go through the entire process and game plan and play calling and everything else, and you just shred it apart because it deserves it, right? Like you game planned wrong, you played terrible, everyone messed up, and you got to fix a lot of things. And then there's a loss where you should be really mad at yourself for completely giving it away. What's the stealing a loss from the jaws of victory or something? Like that's what this felt like. This felt like they outplayed the Broncos and then completely just gave the game away in multiple instances. And we do have to give the Broncos credit for the final drive, and we'll kind of bounce all over the place here a little bit, but they stopped the first 4 trips into the red zone from ending up as a touchdown, which is pretty darn impressive. But also they have asked a lot of the defense. And this is what I was thinking about as they were driving with the dinks and dunks of Russell Wilson to his running back over and over again, is at the end of the Atlanta game, the defense was pretty worn down and they gave up a touchdown, and then Dobbs goes down and scores and wins the game. And it felt kind of the same way. You're on the road. You've gone through a lot the last couple of weeks, multiple road games here. You are down your linebacker. You're asking Anthony Barr to go out there and play a lot of snaps when he hasn't played at all this year. And Russell Wilson just finds the exact right strategy, which was, let's just throw underneath, we'll just get enough. And they wore the clock down so much that the Vikings didn't have a ton of time at the end of the game after they scored the touchdown. But it was just asking the defense to repeatedly, and they've done this for weeks now, repeatedly get the huge stop, get the huge stop, get the huge stop. And at some point, they weren't going to get that huge stop. So it's a game that I think you look back with a ton of regret regret of, that one play, that one drive, that one mistake, but not a game where you would say everything was wrong that they did and all of a sudden Josh Dobbs can't play or so forth. I remember looking up at his statistics midway through the fourth quarter, and he had something like 120 quarterback rating. It was like, oh, okay. Or, it was like he's completing a lot of passes. They're playing offensively well enough. If they don't lose the game, we are going off about the touchdowns that he had and the different aspect of how that he brings to the game as far as the running goes. So this loss would not make me think, oh, buddy, it's over. You just got hit in the face with the regression, the magic, the mania, the Linsanity. It's all come to an end. But it did make me think there were some things that the Broncos did that opposing teams should be watching and probably will be. Look, the Chicago Bears just played a really good game today. I don't think that playing the Bears is a complete give me. I mean, the Lions barely survived in the very final seconds of that game against the Bears, and Matt Eberflus did a tremendous job of out-scheming them the last time that they were in Chicago. The Raiders defense is playing better. I don't have a lot of trust in them, but the underneath stuff working is something we have seen before. And also the defense getting worn down, the injuries playing a role. It's no surprise at the end of the game, they go after a rookie against one of the better receivers at contested catches in the league in Courtland Sutton. Yeah. And this is where you just go, all right, are you going to let this one topple you over? Or is this one where you can just bounce back and say, all right, it was some random stuff and some strange turnovers. So I think that Kevin O'Connell stomped off angrily after the game. I mean, one, because at least according to what I saw on Twitter from the broadcast, it should have been a penalty on Kareem Jackson for hitting Josh Dobbs on that fumble, which would have, I think, negated the fumble or at least given 15 yards back the other way. I think it would have negated the fumble because that's how it was caused. And so he was unhappy with that, unhappy with how much he's emphasized the turnovers, and that ends up happening. So is this going to be the breaking point of you lost the game you shouldn't have and then went over the edge because Denver found some stuff late in the game? Or is it going to be, well, look, this was the game that was bound to happen to them at some point. It was why I really hemmed and hawed throughout the week of like, who am I going to pick the Vikings? Am I not going to pick the Vikings? Because I just thought those turnovers were going to come back to life at some point. So I don't know which one. Like, it's going to prove over the coming weeks which one of those things it's going to be. But this loss does have the potential to push them back in that other direction since they got the best possible version of Josh Dobbs over these last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe that it will be one that we look back on and we're not thinking that was the game that toppled it all over, because there have been opportunities for this thing to go completely haywire this year, and they haven't. And I think a lot of that is rooted in just kind of the buzzword it is, but culture and not freaking out that this thing is, the sky is falling now because they lost a game they probably should have won. I think there will be some actionable things that come out of this, but I also think when you digest the film tomorrow, and when we talk to Kevin O'Connell over Zoom, and when we talk to these guys throughout the week, they will kind of, like you said, latch onto the fact that there was a lot of good we did in this game. And frankly, we should have won the game. And yeah, it really hurts and it stings because when you lose a game that you should have won, that sucks. And it can set you back, especially when now you're 6-5 and, you know, the NFC isn't great, but if you continue to lose games that you should win, then you're going to be right on that playoff cut line. So I understand the frustration, but this is not a game that I think has to be, all right, well, the Magic's run out, it's over. I think there are things from this game that you can apply moving forward. And if you just also be super hyper focused on taking care of the football, which sometimes I wonder if like talking about it almost is like counterproductive, because you're like, we can't turn the ball over, and then you end up turning the ball over. That's what it felt for like the first month of the season. But I think if they can kind of just continue to emphasize that while also taking the good of this game, this doesn't have to be a game that we look back on and say, yep, that was where it all turned, around. Because I think there were things that Josh Dobbs did in this game that moving forward he can still continue to kind of build off of. I think what a lot of people who are waiting for the other shoe to drop here are thinking is at some point Josh Dobbs is going to turn into a pumpkin and he's going to be bad, and the Vikings are going to lose games because of that. They did not lose this game because he was bad. There were some questionable moments. There are times where I think the last drive, and this is probably being a little bit too critical because the last drive's hard. Denver's taking the roof off of there was no deep options for the Vikings. They're very good in coverage. The Broncos are, but it did feel like Josh Dobbs just kind of relied on that scrambling ability. And sometimes maybe it's okay to just eat the play, throw it away. I think of that third down play where it goes as an intentional grounding. And maybe just throw it, if you can find a way to throw it away in that moment instead of trying to reverse out and scramble. And I get there's like a duality of that because part of what has made those last 2 weeks amazing is because sometimes those scrambles have worked. But I think when you look at what he can do, a lot of the things that he did well for the last 2 weeks, he did well tonight. And if they won the game, we would be talking about those plays. But I think he needs to also improve upon, like, what can I learn from this game? It's okay to like eat a play here and there, to just throw the ball in the dirt. There were a couple times, not just like looking at the last drive where the scramble went awry and it turns into a grounding play, but the drive before that where Greg Joseph, they settle for a field goal, they go up 20-15. Josh Dobbs tried to throw an interception there because he was just kind of trying to force something there. So I think there is almost like I got to do more because I've done so much for these 2 weeks. And I don't think a loss is ever good, but I think this will make him be reflective of like, okay, like I have a really pretty good team around me. I just need to take care of the ball. He didn't do a great job of that tonight. I know the fumble is tough to pin on him because it's a tough play call, the pitch pass, but still you can hold on to the ball. And, like the Ty Chandler missing the block, getting hit while you throw, that's tough too, but it still like goes down as an interception. And Josh Dobbs said it himself, the ball is your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and it starts with him. And he has the ball almost every play to start every single snap. So if he's turning the ball over twice, which he did tonight, not good. But I think there are things that you can still look forward and build off of from this game. And it's not like this is the sky's falling on this situation.
They also had a couple of turnover-worthy throws and a couple of snaps that ended up getting botched, including the first play of the game. So it felt like even though they only turned it over, or Dobbs turned it over 2 times, and neither was, one was probably a bad play call, and the other one is, on Ty Chandler. It felt like they were playing with fire there with the turnovers all night long, and that they eventually got burned. But, I think what we need to do is kind of go through and look at where things need to be blamed, right? Like what's reasonable and what's not in a game like this. Because, if you just go through the current list of comments, and you're like, okay, we've got fire Kevin O'Connell, we've got Dobbs is who we thought he was, we've got, get rid of Madison, whatever. Like there's a lot of ideas, we'll put it that way, about what happened here and where we should pin the blame. So we should start with Kevin O'Connell on this. Because the first play of the game, and of course he was not willing to really go there after the game, and I don't blame him. I guess I wouldn't stand up at a podium and say I made a terrible play call that was completely senseless, just a garbage idea that never ever should have been tried. There's so many things that could go wrong there. TJ Hawkinson doesn't take snaps. You have to flip the ball through the air to Josh Dobbs, who is not a running back. And then he has to ram himself through linebackers and safeties who are flying downhill at him. There's no universe where that makes any sense to do. And you sort of got what you asked for. It was the same with Dalvin Cook and trying to throw a pass last year. Like I've never seen Dalvin Cook throw a pass in my life. And yet you were trying to have him throw it into the end zone and he fumbles. Or, even last year in the playoffs, you're trying to throw a pass to Kirk Cousins. Of all people in this universe who you don't throw a pass to, Kirk Cousins would be the guy not to. So there was that. There was also, we're going to dial up a pass play on 3rd and 1, overthinking it while you're having a lot of success in the run game. The overall run game plan worked really well. I didn't think much else worked there from some of those like key spots on those 3rd downs. And the other thing is too, that the final drive, you really have to point to, I think, the play calling there as well, because there was time and there were timeouts to methodically move into Greg Joseph's range, and this air thing with the ball traveling farther. Oh, it's real. Like the ball, actually, every punt that Ryan Wright had, I was like, oh, that's like a 30-yard punt. Oh my gosh. Every kickoff looked like it was being hit for a home run by a Colorado Rockies slugger. The ball travels like crazy here. He could have kicked a 60-yard field goal, I think, probably with ease. He's got one of the best legs, or at least with ease the distance. It would have given you a chance. You don't have to run guys deep down the field with longer developing concepts, which allowed the Broncos to be very aggressive in that situation. I thought the Broncos defense called it up really, really well at the end of that. So if you're looking back and talking about how much criticism from a head coach who has earned a ton of adulation in recent weeks for just a brilliant game plan to start against the Saints, a magical all-time memorable performance against Atlanta, this was not his night. It doesn't mean that it was, I think, altogether awful, because we saw open receivers at times. We really saw a great rush plan, a running game plan, which we haven't seen in recent weeks. But there were also, in a game where you lose by 1 point and you go through it, you don't need a fine-tooth comb to find some of the situations where you go, I think it just shows you in the situation you're in with the injuries that you have. It really has to be pretty perfect. And it was definitely not tonight.
Yeah, and I think these games are always interesting because there is so much frustration from a fan base, and there's obviously, it's understandable. Like, this is a game they felt like they should have won, but the reaction of all of a sudden now Kevin O'Connell's the worst coach in the league is just, it's an overreaction. It's an emotional reaction. I understand, but I also kind of get like the feeling of this wasn't his best game, because it really did start from the first drive of the game, where it was like, this was objectively a too cute play call, running the ball with your tight end, pitching to your quarterback, who you've talked at length about being smart with how you run him, because you don't want him to get hurt, because you have only Nick Mullins now, who's coming off a back injury, as your backup. Now you got to take care of Josh Dobbs and protect him. And then you pitch him the ball and let safeties and linebackers run downhill 100 miles an hour at him. That was a questionable play call in real time at the time. And to Kevin O'Connell's point, he said, well, yeah, that's a play call, but there's a lot of game left. There's a lot of football left. And there was, but there was also, in that lot of football left, a lot of places in between where Kevin O'Connell, if it was just one bad play call and he was great the rest of the way, people I don't think would be calling for his head tonight. And calling for his head is not correct. It's not the right take. But I understand the frustration, because it wasn't just one bad play call. There were a lot of questionable decisions made throughout the game where at least you were like, I don't know if I would have done that. The 3rd and 1 call, when you're running the ball great and you throw a pass and then you don't go for it because you didn't get the 3rd and 1 that you'd wanted. Now you're 4th and 1 and you're punting instead of going. If you go to just run the ball, then you got a new set of downs. There were elements of, questionable decision makings throughout the game. And I think that is also why there is such a frustration with the head coach right now, is it wasn't just the questionable play call at the beginning of the game. It was a handful of questionable play calls throughout the game. So it did start off on the wrong foot, and at times it got better, but I think there was just kind of a sour taste in the mouth of a lot of people after that too cute play call from the beginning. And frankly, there weren't a ton of, moments where it was like, all right, he's on fire today. So I think he left himself room for criticism right off the bat, and he didn't really do himself many favors along the way. I don't think he was ultra conservative in this game. I think there is, like, at times he did go for it, and there was a fake punt call from his own 30. So like he it's not like he was like, let's not win the game. He was aggressive about it. There were plays after that fake that worked out well, where you're trying to get a touchdown, or maybe I understand taking a shot and letting Dobbs throw. But at that point, Josh Dobbs didn't look super comfortable either. So I understand running the ball when you're gaining like 5 yards a carry. So I understand all the criticism. I understand the frustration. I think it's just a little bit of an emotional reaction after the game. But I also think the head coach put himself up for that criticism with a questionable play call literally 2 minutes into the game.
And there is a little bit of a tendency here, not just when it comes to trickeration, but
Mhm.
also when it comes to there are sometimes that the answer is very simple and it's sort of right there in front of you. And I tweeted after it was an early play in the game where they passed it and Dobbs threw it behind Alexander Madison on 3rd and 1.
Mhm.
And I tweeted, just run it. I mean, just like sometimes it's right there. I mean, even when Kirk is the quarterback, there would be a 3rd and 3, and they'd throw a bomb down the sideline
Right.
or something. You'd be like, no, it's okay to just throw a quick screen, throw a swing pass or something, or just run it. And if you have a little more trust in your running back, I don't know, but tonight you should have had a lot of trust. The other thing is too that when Ty Chandler carries the ball 10 times and Alexander Madison carries the ball 18 times, you have failed. You get an F for that decision. I mean, because Ty Chandler was just dynamic and explosive tonight.
Mhm.
And I mean, gosh, the guy was doing everything. He's on special teams. He ran down, even though the play didn't count, like he ran down Patrick Surtain after he intercepted the ball and tackled him. I mean, just like he was doing absolutely everything tonight. He was very hard to stop. It's 3rd down and 20, which you would never expect to get. And here's Ty Chandler. As soon as he touches the ball, he is so fast that you think, I mean, just from my eye, I thought, oh, well, he's going to get tracked down and get like 9 yards or whatever. Nope, he got 20. And like that's Ty Chandler for you. And that's so to me, that's a failure. And I guess like there's a difference between, well, he didn't punt or he should have passed a little more here or there. I thought the passing was shaky enough where I understood why they were conservative in some ways, but I think there's other points that I did have question about. And there's just this little bit of overcomplicating, trying too hard, that happens. And I guess last week, if it's coming off of last week, I understand what you're saying, because in the second half, they clearly did shut it down, get a little too conservative last week. And he admitted that this week. So I didn't think that was so much the issue. It was just, do you have the right feel for the right play at the right time? And it felt like tonight at times they didn't, which is still weird to talk about because they should have won the game easily. And I also understand at times where you're like, Denver, when is Denver going to move the ball? Like, let me know, because they were just miserable on offense for a lot of the night and then come through because of some of the turnovers where they were just given easy chances to score there. Let's talk about Josh Dobbs. The touchdown is just magical, where he's breaking defensive ends tackles. The other rushing touchdown that he had where he read the man coverage, saw that everybody was covered up, but there was nobody in the middle, and just shoots into the end zone. This is a dynamic that he has brought to the offense that is different from anything we've seen in a very long time. And it makes up for some of the other stuff at the same time. Not always sharp with the accuracy, an absolutely miserable final drive, some of the scrambling. And this is always the give and the take of every scrambling quarterback who has ever lived, is that some of the scrambling becomes, oh man, that's not actually working, and you're scrambling to nothing. And there was another time toward the end of the game too, and this is where I thought, Dobbs was maybe just a little bit more on the shaky side. He's rolling out, and he's got maybe 8 yards there. Is this on the final drive? He's got like 8 yards there, and Garrett Bradbury starts to go down the field thinking, oh, he's running, like I'm going to block the safety, and like we're going. And then he throws it, and you're like, no, like, nope. And look, turning back around toward your right side, the other way around, at some point, someone's going to be there and kill you. So like this is what you're going to have, I think, through the rest of the way. Is there are times where it's going to be incredible and breathtaking with the athleticism he has, but also it's a struggle that he had in Arizona, turning over the ball, some of the decision-making in the pocket. And we saw shades of that tonight, even though he executed a good number of throws, a couple to Brandon Powell, a couple to Jordan Addison, a couple to even Josh Oliver. This just felt much more like what I thought Josh Dobbs games were going to look like, if that makes sense. Not what we saw against the Saints that was completely dominant.
Yeah, but I still look at this game and I get it. Like, he was a big part of the why they lost the game, because at the end of the day, he has 2 turnovers. He bobbles 2 exchanges with Garrett Bradbury. He makes questionable decisions with the ball at times. But what I keep going back to is the 2 touchdown plays. And just like the fact that he's able to do that just still unlocks a different realm of this offense that we hadn't seen in a lot of times when Kirk Cousins was under center. The touchdown play, let's go back to that. He rolls right, it's his designed rollout, and Alexander Madison's the first read and almost like the only read in that situation. It's like Madison's going to flare out. I'm going to roll with him. I'm going to throw him the ball because most of the time in those situations, the guy's kind of leaking out and he's open. Well, he wasn't open. And I think in a lot of situations, if that was Kirk on that rollout, Madison's not there, I'm throwing the ball away. Game over. We'll kick a field goal. Josh Dobbs rolls out, shakes off a defensive end, outside linebacker, rush type, sticks his foot in the ground, settles his feet, looks downfield, pump fakes, throws to Josh Oliver for a touchdown. The running touchdown later, after halftime, like you said, recognizes man coverage, takes off, says, I'm going to beat everyone else to the end zone, does. Those are things I think you latch onto and you say, like, this offense still can be really good, as clunky as it looked tonight, because of Josh Dobbs, not because, not in spite of him, not like, okay, well, eventually this thing's going to come off the rails because he's just playing with magic, a horseshoe, whatever you want to call it. I think there was some of that for the first 2 games of his career in Minnesota. I think there was a little bit of like, wow, this feels a little bit magical. Like, is this sustainable? And we've learned tonight it's not. But I think there are some elements of his game that are sustainable as you push forward. So the frustration with Josh Dobbs tonight is merited. It comes with the territory of when people really start to latch on and like you and think you're the guy moving forward. You open yourself up to some of those criticisms, especially when you're as shaky as you were tonight. But I always come back to, like, this offense still looks different when he's the guy under center. And by the way, you're going to get the best player on the team back in time, maybe even next week on Monday Night Football. Justin Jefferson's back, and man, wouldn't you just like to have Justin Jefferson on that last drive? Just either as someone you can throw the ball to, or as someone taking 2 guys with him, as he regularly does. Just the offense is going to look so much different. But I think this isn't a reason, even though he was shaky, to think, wow, this Josh Dobbs experiment's over. I think there's still a lot of good that can come with him under center. And that's why I'm not like going to be so hypercritical that, like, he was superhuman for 2 weeks and now he looked human tonight. And, like, yeah, that was going to happen at some point. But I still think this offense can be good with him leading the charge.
And there's a question that I have, which is, how much were some of those blitzes something that other teams are going to be able to do?
Yeah.
That's something I really want to watch, because now Matt Eberflus in Chicago does not blitz a whole lot. And yet what we saw last time is when they played the Vikings, they played different coverages and stuff. He will switch it up. And it is possible that we see a change, a more aggressive approach against Dobbs, because the Denver Broncos did a really good job. What they were talking about after the game was situationally, that both Kevin O'Connell and Josh Dobbs says situationally they called the blitzes at the right time. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. It wasn't like they were just rushing, but it was like third downs. Yep. It was big spots where they hit on some of those blitzes and frustrated Dobbs and forced him, to try to scramble or forced him to make a bad throw. And that impacted the outcome. For me, it was always going into this. It was, if you could get 2 out of 3 here, if you could you're playing 3 opponents that you feel like you should beat, although Denver's playing better recently, and you feel like you should win all 3. Mm-hmm. But that's usually not how it works in the NFL. Even around the league, we see strange results and upsets, and especially when it's closer to a 50-50 game. Mm-hmm. The line slightly favored Denver, right, for a reason, because even the gambling community thought at some point a 5-game win streak is going to come to an end. The question is there a solution here that is going to be found against Josh Dobbs that they can use against him? And then you go back to they moved the ball actually quite well all night long, and they just didn't finish the job. And so that, like, I always have to kind of pull myself back of like, well, they didn't really botch everything here. But let's talk about the defensive side. I mean, again, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the game, as you're sort of formulating in your mind, what are we going to be saying about this game after? I was again ready to marvel at Brian Flores' defense and just say, look, I don't know how he did it. I mean, you've got Ivan Pace out there, a rookie handling the green dot. You have, Anthony Barr showing up and making plays. You're using everybody again here on a night like this. And there were a couple of close calls where they almost got a fumble. They almost get an interception, just didn't quite happen. Daniel Hunter gets a sack. DJ Wanham's getting another sack. They go like, oh, look here. They're doing it again. They're doing it again. But then in the final drive, this is something that if you're talking about the one area where there has to be a weakness, because no defense covers all of the field. Otherwise, everyone would run that scheme, right? If there was one defensive style. And the one thing that putting a lot of guys at the line of scrimmage and a lot of guys 10 yards deep does is it leaves a little bit of a soft area in the middle, and they were able to take advantage of that. I chalk it up more to they were worn down at that point. They were trying to keep everything in front of them because they knew that it required a touchdown. That, okay, you can dink, you can dunk, you can run the clock down, you can get a couple of first downs, but you just can't get in the end zone. And then on the touchdown, it's a great throw and it's a great catch. And you also still have an opportunity to win the game. Considering you turn the ball over 3 times, giving up 21 points and a ton of field goals is a successful night. But it's on the quarterback side. We always talk about how those game-winning drives are hard to repeat. Last year, we discussed that with Kirk Cousins, where it got to the playoffs and they weren't able to do it. Well, it's the same thing with the defense, where I don't think you can just ask your defense to do this all the time, and that eventually one was going to go awry. So last week, Winston throws you a fly ball that you catch and it ends the game and you don't blow it. But early in the year, there were other instances where the ball bounces off somebody and turns into a touchdown and you do blow it. And such is the nature of playing 1-score games. And I felt like walking out of this, that one of the main takeaways is this is probably what we're in for the rest of the Dobbs. Like, the defense is going to have to make those big plays every time, and they are more likely than not going to get worn down at times. And it's going to come down to that. But I do wonder if the dink and dunk stuff, as you face, Justin Fields, as you face maybe Aiden O'Connell, maybe, I don't know who knows who could be playing quarterback for the Raiders at that point. But I just think to me, it's a lot to ask to say, go 0 for 4, in the red zone or do it again. Shut them down 5 straight times in the red zone. That was just, to me, too much to ask for the defense. So I was willing to say that was going to happen eventually, even if, it did play out that way.
Yeah. To the point about dink and dunk, you did see that style works. I think part of that was situationally, like you said, let's not let anything get behind us. They need a touchdown to win the game. But we have seen this defense be susceptible to that style of play call. It's why Justin Herbert completed 90% of his passes earlier this season, because it was a lot of Keenan Allen. It was a lot of quick, right off the line of scrimmage. Let's get the ball out quickly into these little pockets of space that are just going to inherently be there in this defense. So I will be curious how the next 2 weeks transpire. I guess 2.5, because we have the bye in between. Maybe we won't find out, because I don't frankly think Justin Fields is all too great at, if that guy's open, let me just hit him. I think the quarterback position is pretty tough on him. Maybe it won't be found out, with Aiden O'Connell, because he threw 3 interceptions today. It's maybe the competition you're facing, isn't going to be able to take advantage of what you've exposed as a potential weakness, but it could be a potential weakness. So it's something to definitely keep an eye on. As far as the game itself and how this defense performed, great. They performed really, really well. And we asked Cam Bynum about this after the game. He denied it, but I think there was an element of this is you force 5 field goals throughout the game. You're given just horribly unfavorable field position at times, and the defense is basically standing on its head to make sure these balls end up going between the uprights and not in the end zone. I think that wears on you. It wears on you physically. Obviously at altitude, you're here. Like you said about the balls travel further at altitude. You also get tired more if you aren't used to it. And I think there was probably a little bit of them being gassed on that final possession. But I think it also mentally wears on you. Wow, we've really played well today, and we have to make sure we hold them to another field goal or we're going to lose. And I think it was just a culmination of not just today and how they bended and bended and bended, but didn't break. But also the last month, this whole 5-game winning streak, they've been asked to bend and bend and bend and not break and come through and win the game. And you have defensive backs calling themselves closers because they think, oh, we have to go out and win the game. And it's great that they have that confidence and they think like, we are capable of doing this, but it's also not great that they feel like they have to go out and win the game. And you heard Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus say it today. We have to go out and win the game. It's because the defense has kind of been put in a tough position, not just tonight, but across this 5-game winning streak. So yeah, we're going to need a little bit more balance moving forward, because I don't think you can just rely on this defense to constantly force turnovers as a way to make sure you win a football game. Like we said at the beginning of this podcast, it's going to circle back to the turnovers at the end. A lot of that's hinged on the offense putting them in a tough position tonight. But yeah, I think with the amount of plays this defense has made over the course of the last month and a half, there was probably going to be a game where they just didn't take the ball away, kind of like law of averages. They didn't tonight. There were opportunities, but it didn't bounce their way. The ball bounced out of bounds. The ball got chopped out of Josh Metellus' hands. I think you can chalk that up to you're not going to get 2 takeaways every single game when it feels like you've been getting those. So that's kind of what it came down to tonight. But they still should have won the game. So like it's just a weird, hard game to talk about, because all of these things that feel like very well-deserved criticisms, the whole tenor of this game is different if they just get that stop, or instead of kicking a field goal, the offense is able to punch it into the end zone. So it's just one of those games where we're going to like talk about and criticize and critique, and rightfully so. But sometimes the simplest answer is the right answer. And this one is just like, if they didn't turn the ball over, they would have won. And it's simple as that.
So it reminds me actually a lot of week 1 against the Tampa Bay Bucks, where they outplayed the Bucks, but they threw a very strange interception at the end of the first half that cost them a touchdown, or at very least a field goal. Mm-hmm. And then the game swung in the second half. They didn't get the key stops. They didn't touch the ball again at the end of the game, because the Bucks were able to drive it and exploit some of the weaknesses on the underneath passing and so forth. And we came out of that game with 2 conclusions. 1, they outplayed the Bucks and should have won. But 2, this is bad. Like, this is bad for your outlook of your entire season. Now, it hasn't destroyed their entire season, but still, at the beginning, it looked like it, because we knew how tough their schedule was about to be. And this is where we always, at the end of the podcast, talk about the bigger picture toward this. And for me, it's, all right, we can discuss how, like, the process of the game, like the run of play, they were the better team, to use kind of a soccer term there, right? So, all right, like, overall, I still think that you were a better team than the Denver Broncos, and I don't think that this means that it's going to come apart and so forth. And actually, let me scroll up here, because Larry had a great overreaction tweet, but I want to ask you how much of an overreaction. So Larry said here, I'll put it on the screen for everybody. This is good stuff, Larry. It says it just kind of feels like the season falling apart when Kirk dropped. We just didn't know it until now. So what he's saying is that when Kirk got hurt, the season was actually over, and we just found out today. Now, the thing is that there may be merit to this, and it's going to be determined in the next couple of weeks, because Cincinnati is all of a sudden very beatable without Joe Burrow. And then we get to the end of the year. Green Bay is not a joke. They played well today, but still a team you feel like you should beat at home. And then the 2 Detroit games, which will be very difficult. When you start adding that up, though, if you don't win this next one, then no matter who you're playing, it's not going to feel like you have a big advantage. Mm-hmm. And to lose to a team that you think is inferior to you in a game where you played better, all of a sudden now that door does crack open of what Larry's saying. It's like the season, it does not quite feel like it's teetering on the edge, but man, if they lose against the Chicago Bears, it will feel like, oh, well, it was just those 2 random games that Josh Dobbs won that we'll remember forever, and all the magical times we had. And that, if they win tonight, that scenario is not possible to me. Mm-hmm. That scenario is you have so many wins, you'd be 7-4, you'd be feeling great, and you're going in to play teams that aren't any good. And they were like this close to having it. They are just don't fumble that ball, kick another field goal at very least. You're in field goal position at that time, and there you are. And to let that slip away, I think in that locker room, you could really feel it. You could feel how they all knew right there. If you go to 7-4, I mean, you are making the playoffs. You would have to completely melt down and lose like every game the rest of the way. And now you lose another one. You go back to 500, then it's sort of anybody's ball game still in the NFC. That's where in the big picture that this changes a lot. I don't think it changes a lot about our Dobbs discussion. You're not benching Dobbs. I think he played like a starting quarterback today and can still win you a good amount of games. But again, if they win, we're going, oh boy, Josh Dobbs, they can win with this guy. Keep it rolling. It's Keenum season again, and maybe he's the future quarterback. Now for this next week, that whole is Dobbs the future quarterback thing kind of gets put on hold as it's more of a build up to, all right, like this game suddenly becomes feeling like it's more of your season against the Bears. So there's major implications to this, I think.
Yeah, and I think that comment's still pretty much of an overreaction, like, because I think the last 2 weeks I don't think, but I guess it does leave the door open. I don't think the last 2 weeks were just some blip on the radar that all of a sudden now the magic's gone. And I don't think that, because of a lot of what we did see tonight, like that there were elements of the game that were good. It wasn't just the worst game we ever, and they get blown out by Denver, and that the season was really done and we just didn't know it. But at the same time, I can totally understand that reaction. And that's kind of the way that I think this whole week at TCO Performance Center is going to be covered, is like that game against the Bears now at home on Monday Night Football on national television isn't just like a walkover. Like, all right, they're just on our way to a nice bye week. Now it's like, you better win the game. Otherwise, like, then you start to sound the alarms, and maybe that would be an overreaction still, but like, not really, because of what happened tonight. Like, it does just feel like the door is open now for the potential, at least, that this snowballs. And it just didn't have to be, because you should have won this game. And maybe that's where a lot of this frustration lies, is that like a lot of Minnesota sports fandom is just waiting for things to go wrong. And this feels like, oh, man, this could be it. This could be the thing that sparks all of it going awry. Like I said earlier, I'm still inclined to believe that they can catch this thing before it kind of gets out of hand, but we won't find that out until Monday, until at US Bank Stadium in primetime against the Bears, who you absolutely should beat. If you lose to that team, then all of a sudden it's like, man, this could get out of hand. It could be in trouble. So yeah, that's what happened tonight, is like you at least left that small sliver of the door open for the potential of, we do look back on that Denver game and say, yeah, that's where everything went wrong. Think it is an overreaction, but it's certainly possible. So,
well, and in the comments section, it's also brought up that the NFC has such a bad level of talent that even just not completely melting, if you get 8 wins, you might get into the playoffs just by having 8 wins. I mean, the Tampa Bay Bucks were horrible today against San Francisco. I honestly have no idea who's chasing them down. Washington lost to Tommy DeVito. I mean, like there's almost no one to get them. If they might win. I mean, 8 is as low as I'll go, but like, even if you won 7, are you playing like the last week for the possibility of still getting in, because these other teams are so atrocious that are going for the playoffs? But I think that when Dobbs won those last 2 games, especially against the Saints, and it was very impressive, then there's started to be a little bit of a shift toward, okay, yeah, you're trying to make the playoffs. It would be fun. It'd be a crazy story. Dobbs shows up here, like they coached and defense their way and everything else to the playoffs. But there was almost this little feeling of like, would someone not want to play them? Like, would they'd be a little scary? And I think the general takeaway was, yeah, like they could be, because they have this other dynamic at quarterback, because they have this defense that's playing well. And I don't think that tonight was enough for me to say like, okay, forget all that. Like that conversation never happened. Men in Black sort of like, just let's pretend it never happened, because they did move the ball, and because they did run better, and because they, did have a good defensive performance on the whole. At the same time though, if you lose next week, then we are saying, all right, well, yeah, you could probably make the playoffs, but is this going to be worth it? And there's that feeling starts to settle in like it did last year when they lost to Green Bay. It was like, okay, you barely survived the Colts being down 30 points, and then you lost at Lambeau. And going into the Giants game, I think there wasn't a ton of belief that they had any chance to really go anywhere in the NFC. And not that I'm saying that Dobbs, everyone believed they could go to the championship. I just mean that there was all of a sudden this kind of intrigue of like, hey, what if it happens again? Like, because it's happened so many times in Vikings history. And tonight it pours ice cold water on that for now. And next week, I think we'll determine whether that is a trend or whether it was just one of those days where you turn the ball over. So anyway, thanks all of you for staying up late. Mountain time messes with you. Let me tell you, I had no idea when we were supposed to be here, when the game started. My computer has the central time on it, so I don't even know what time it is right now, technically. But I appreciate all of you staying up late to watch the broadcast here. Big audience tonight, and I appreciate that. Thank you to our look at this stadium view behind us. That is incredible. And also, of course, Dane Mizutani, Pioneer Press. Read his on deadline work that he has to actually get back to right now. So really appreciate all of you. It'll be a very interesting week of discussion as we continue to break this down and go back and look at the tape and then go into the week against the Bears. So thanks again, everybody, and we will catch you all next time.